All right, so I'm delighted to introduce Lynn Silver, who has been with us on the steering committee of this campaign. She is senior advisor at the Public Health Institute and director of the Project Lean at the Institute. She spent 8 years in New York as assistant health commissioner during Nanny Bloomberg's administration. And she led groundbreaking initiatives to ban extra large sizes of soda, eliminate trans fat in food establishments, and require calorie labeling at fast food restaurants. So, welcome, Lynn.
So I got asked this question, is soda the new tobacco? And I started thinking about it, and certain adjectives came into my head. And they were adjectives that brought to mind a certain childhood fable, and maybe that's because I'm a pediatrician, so I like stories for little kids. But there were adjectives like big and bad. And I came to formulate my scientific hypothesis, which was that big tobacco and big soda may be from the same species. And it's a species that every American probably recognizes from something your mother told you when you were little. The first thing that they have in common are really the magnitude of the health problems we're talking about. You know, we talk about a lot of smaller problems in public health, a toxin that comes and affects, 100 people or 1,000 people or even 1 million people. But the problems that we're talking about with big tobacco and with big soda and with food are really on a very, very massive scale. There's a recent study called the Global Burden of Disease that attempts to quantify the harm from different causes, both the epidemiology of what's causing people to live or die globally and in each country of the world, and also the underlying risk factors that lead to those outcomes. Tobacco, as we've known for many years, is one of the largest. Their estimate was 6.3 million deaths globally in 2010. Dietary risks, according to the Global Burden of Disease study, were actually even higher. They calculate 11.4 million deaths globally. And that is a composite of a number of different dietary factors. The largest one is actually fruit and vegetable consumption, but salt, trans fat, sugary drinks, and a number of other components of the diet. Sugary drinks is not the largest component. It's about 300,000 of those deaths in that particular study's estimate in 2010. But what it has in common with trans fat and with salt is that these are some of the rapidly changing causes in a changing food supply in many countries, and that they're also some of the most fixable because nobody needs to eat sugary drinks or to eat trans fat, for example, as Denmark demonstrated when it banned it quite successfully in 2003. I'm sorry. Basically, these are completely dispensable products. Can you hear me better now? And even if this particular study's estimates are off, even if they're off by 50%, the numbers that we're talking about are huge and extremely important. You can put them on the scale of deaths in World War II. It's that kind of scale that we're talking about. And that's very unusual. Second, the other part to being big is that these are big global companies. So these are not our small backyard companies. Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, Ambev, which is the Brazilian beverage company, Philip Morris, British American Tobacco. These companies are in the top 200 of our big publicly traded companies internationally, which gives them an incredible base of economic and political power. And they act globally. We've seen with the tobacco industry, as Stan Glantz has launched his bombs at them successfully over many years. They've run away from some of our communities in California, but they had the whole rest of the world to play in. So they started playing globally with devastating consequences. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that probably is better. Hello? Is this on? So they started playing globally with devastating consequences for people around the world. This picture, for example, is indigenous populations in the state of Chiapas in the south of Mexico. I have a matching photo of all the Coke distribution trucks. But it is often the poorest populations which are suffering the most severe effects of the globalization of these industries on their health. And these products are bad for you, like not a little bit bad for you, but big time bad for you. And they're bad for you in ways that people often aren't aware of. So all of you know that smoking causes cancer, right? Did you know it causes diabetes? Stan, you can skewer me if I get any of this wrong. Did you know it probably kills more people through heart disease? So tobacco causes heart disease, cancer, diabetes, arthritis, messes up your mouth. If you're pregnant or a baby in your mother's womb and she's smoking, it can cause you to have low birth weight, stillbirth, and other problems. It can mess with your eyes. And guess what? When we look at soda, the list is remarkably similar. It causes heart disease. It causes cancer. It causes the one we've all heard about. So most of you know about the soda makes you gain weight, you become obese, you have a higher risk of diabetes sequence. How many of you knew about that one? Everybody. How many of you knew about cancer? Not so many. Arthritis. Of course, it can rot your teeth. It can make pregnant women be overweight, and those overweight women develop gestational diabetes, and that gestational diabetes affects their children. So actually opposite to tobacco, which causes low birth weight babies, gestational diabetes causes high birth weight babies, but either end of the spectrum is not good for the baby. It causes all the complications of diabetes, and those are perhaps some of the most devastating effects of soda consumption are the amputations that are caused by diabetes, the blindness that is caused by diabetes, the dependency on renal dialysis for kidney failure that is caused by diabetes. And we have more amputations. We know about all the young men and women who've lost limbs as a result of the war in Iraq and in Afghanistan, just talking about ours and then all the people over there. But more Americans are losing their limbs to diabetes than even all of our victims of war. Another characteristic that these businesses have in common, they're very competitive. They're huge competitors. British American Tobacco competes with Philip Morris and whatever, and Coke competes with PepsiCo, and they compete for mates and they compete for young children to eat. But when they need to survive as a pack, they attack in packs and they get together, as Stan and Mark just described so beautifully, and Holly mentioned this morning. So we have, the number I have is 9.1, but 9.1 million as of today to defeat measures in our two little towns of San Francisco and Berkeley, which is just a little bit, did I get this number right? 47 million. So, just 2 years ago, actually, it was right a couple of months after I moved to California, and I started off as a local health officer, and we were trying to pass Prop 29 to raise the taxes in California on tobacco. And we failed because Big Tobacco mobilized $47 million in a very strong campaign to defeat that. And California, which was a pioneer in tobacco control, today has one of the lower prices for a pack of cigarettes in the nation because of this type of work, of effective attacks in packs by these companies. Another characteristic that they have together with the big bad wolf is that they blame, in rapists and sexual assault. There's been a lot of stuff in the newspapers about sexual assault recently, but blaming the victim. It's his fault. He liked my Coke, and I'm not going to stop him from his freedom to drink my Coke or smoke my cigarettes. So it really was Little Red Riding Hood's fault for wandering around in the forest by herself. But if this is what your forest looks like, which is what our forest looks like, it's what our convenience stores look like, our gas stations, our supermarkets. Guess what's going to happen to the person who's wandering in that forest? The behaviors are determined by our environment. The things that have changed that have caused the obesity epidemic in the United States and worldwide were not people becoming more gluttonous or becoming less moral or lazier. It was massive changes in our food environment and in our food supply that have occurred over these last 3 decades, which led to dramatic changes in food consumption and consequently to the changes in the body habitus of Americans and people around the globe. Another characteristic that they have in common are preying on youth to establish addiction. And the strategies, again, are very powerful. Marketing that's targeted to capture youth, effective use of social media, celebrities and movies. How many of you have seen, what is it? I'm blanking out on the name. The one on the right, on the top right, where they sing. American Idol, thank you. How many of you have seen American Idol? Did you realize you were watching a Coke ad? They can't get away with being a cigarette ad anymore, but they can get away with being a Coke ad. But the cigarette ads they can get away with now actually are the e-cigarette ads. And it's really incredible. all of the old ads from when I was growing up and some of you were growing up, when cigarettes were glamorous and sexy and people would be languidly smoking their cigarettes and Virginia Slims, are now being recycled for e-cigarettes. And UCSF is doing a great job of documenting some of that. But associating these products with happiness and with sexiness, placing them. What's at eye level in the supermarket? Regular Coke. Power walls of tobacco. So the way they pay for placement, they adjust their pricing and promotions to make sure that we consume these products regularly. So many of the marketing strategies are the same. And that really means that a lot of our strategies to change them have to be the same. Because to respond to these strategies often requires similar strategies. Now, these strategies work really well, what they've been doing, and soda consumption had almost tripled in the United States between 1977 and 2001. And that's really one of the reasons why it's been targeted so heavily by public health advocates, is because it is such a big contributor to that added 200 or 300 calories a day that Americans are eating. About half of it is coming specifically from soda, which is our largest source of added sugars. This is one example that I love. The year I was born, the only size soda in a McDonald's was 7 ounces. That wasn't a child size. That was just a soda. At McDonald's was 7 ounces. Over the subsequent years, they reached as high as 40 to 45 ounces. They've come down a little bit, but even the child size today is more than 50% bigger than what the regular adult size was in the 1950s. And the largest size is, more than about 5 times what was the regular size in the 1950s. So these are the environmental changes and the reason why we can't educate our way out of this. These are the kinds of characteristics of our food environment that need to be modified for us to successfully reverse the obesity epidemic. This is just an example from Mexico that our colleague Simon Barquera brought here a couple of weeks ago. But this is, what do households in Mexico spend their food money on? And just between 1986 and 1998, Mexican households started spending 37% more on soda and 29% less on fruits and vegetables. So these products are not only unhealthy, but they're displacing household economy away from what people need to eat to be healthy towards totally useless calories, with similar effects on dairy products and meats. But we can't stay dumb for that long. So I call this the forest wising up stage. And this is one I love. Right after, so we worked for years on getting that portion cap through in New York City, the one that said you can't sell more than 16 ounces of soda in a restaurant. It was tossed out by the judiciary. It was actually very interesting because many states have regulated the size of beer bottles for quite a number of years. And they do it for competitive reasons. I think it was to try and keep out Grolsch or somebody who had a bigger beer bottle and protect their microbreweries. But when we did this for soda, it unleashed this tremendous backlash. And we had a lawsuit immediately against us with front groups involved and so forth. The judicial decision was actually based strictly on the legal authority of the Board of Health. So the idea is not thrown out, and any other jurisdiction can do this today or can attempt to do this. But the discussion was very interesting, and this was Michael Mudd, who was the former executive vice president of Kraft Foods, who retired in 2004, wrote this in the New York Times. He said, "Anyone who believes these interventions are uncalled for doesn't know the industry the way I do. I was part of the packaged food and beverage business for more than 20 years. I left the industry when I finally had to acknowledge that reform would never come from within, that I could no longer accept a business model that puts profits over public health, and no one else should have to either." And just to show how much this conversation has evolved, Margaret Chan, the Director General of WHO in 2013, had reached the point where she said public health must contend with big tobacco, big food, big soda, and big alcohol. All these industries fear regulation and protect themselves by using the same tactics. And I won't go into them because Stan's described them. But the formulation of health policies must be protected from distortion by commercial or vested interests. So really what's left to us is to learn from tobacco at this point. And this is just an example from New York City of the kinds of strategies that it took to bring smoking down. So in the 1990s, smoking had been stable for a number of years at about 22%. And it really needed to be a sequence of slam bam policy interventions, taxes, environmental change, to keep pushing that smoking rate down. In 2002, first taxes increased, then they passed the Indoor Smoke-Free Air Act and gave away nicotine patches. And as you can see, each successive action brought the rate down a little bit, and then it would stabilize, and you'd have to hit again with something new to keep it pushing it down. Media campaigns, local taxes, federal taxes. Overall, it led to a 30% decrease between 2002 and 2011 in New York City. So the soda wars began about the same time and really have used a series of different strategies to try and address the problem. Some have been increasing awareness and education, just as occurred for tobacco. Procurement strategies, changing what government buys, because government buys huge amounts of food, the military, cities, schools, and so forth. Saying what you can eat or drink in childcare and after school and daycare, which actually the first law we wrote in New York City was regulating the daycare environment and requiring healthy foods, physical activity, and limiting TV. Restricting marketing, which has been very difficult in the United States because of First Amendment issues, but some progress has been made in schools. Sponsorship issues. San Francisco and Santa Clara did kids' meals laws. California almost got through a warning label on soda this past year, sponsored by Senator Kevin Monning. It got close, but it didn't pass. Maybe next year. Attempts to increase the price of soda through taxes or price differentials, the New York City portion size law, which you heard about, and just increasing access to water, making it easier for people to get water. The tax idea has spread like wildfire, and in 2013, a number of states proposed taxes, mostly excise tax, some sales taxes, but none of them passed in 2013. I worked intensively in the 2009 and 2010 tax campaigns in New York City. We couldn't pass, you can't do a tax in New York City, so you have to go to the state legislature. And at the state legislature, all of the shenanigans that were described earlier for tobacco occurred, and we were not successful at that time. A number of, I think, people have then turned back towards the local level to try and promote soda taxation, and these are cities that have tried to do it. And I think really we're learning tremendous lessons from tobacco and from our own experiences with soda, particularly about the importance of broad community support and building that support. And I think that's what really makes the Berkeley soda tax stand out. I'm going to end really with a success story. So in 2013, Mexico passed the Americas' first soda tax. It's a 1 peso per liter tax. It also taxes junk foods. And this was a tremendous fight, although they had the support of the presidency really as a fiscal measure in large part. And the first evaluation of this tax just came out about a week ago, and we had a delegation from Mexico that was up here last week and presented on it, so this is their information. But just in the first quarter, they saw a 10% decline in sugary beverage consumption. They saw a 7% increase in healthier beverages, and a 13% increase in water consumption. So this suggests that the taxes really do have the impact that we hope they have. So what are we seeing in the U.S.? We've seen a 17% decline in sugary drink consumption. So we are making progress from our peak in 1998. And the amount of water that Americans drink has gone up about 38%. So all of the work that is going on across the country is starting to have some success and some influence on population behavior, which is very positive. This is what's happened to sales for the largest soda brands. And as you can see, it's mostly negative, with Coca-Cola falling, Dr. Pepper falling, and even the diet brands falling. So we hope that with Berkeley soda tax and with all of these efforts, both to the tobacco industry and to the soda industry, that we will be sending these big bad wolves running with their tails between their legs somewhere, well, not somewhere else, but into a hole deep in the earth, probably. We don't want to send them to China. On that note, I'm going to give it back to Holly, who's going to just say a few words describing what the Berkeley soda tax is. How many of you live in Berkeley? Oh, yes. Okay, how many of you vote in Berkeley? So we need your votes, and we actually, Saturday mornings, 10 o'clock, 2225 Shattuck, we need you out there canvassing or Sunday through Thursday phone banking. Go on www.Berkeley versus Big Soda.